Coming up on this week's edition of NCBA's Cattlemen to Cattlemen.
Why is sustainability a critical focus for beef producers and the overall beef industry? Today, we'll take an in-depth look at beef sustainability and the impact it's having from the ranch gate to the consumer's plate.
Now, from the Denver headquarters of the National Cattlemen's Beef Association, it's NCBA's Cattlemen to Cattlemen.
Hello and welcome to this special edition of NCBA's Cattlemen to Cattlemen. I'm Kevin Ochsner. Over the past decade, the word sustainability has become widely and frequently used in the beef industry. For some, there is a belief that farms and ranches that continue from generation to generation are by definition sustainable because they continue to exist. But sustainability has a broader meaning for the beef industry and an impact that stretches from the pasture all the way to the beef consumer, whether they are choosing beef here in America or in some foreign country. So today, we're going to spend our time digging into this topic of sustainability and examining what it means for you as a beef producer, both now and in the future. We'll hear from scientists and experts in the field, as well as from producers themselves who are working to ensure that the meaning of beef sustainability is well defined and based on fact and science, not emotion. We begin with a report that provides an overview of this topic of beef sustainability.
Whether tending cows on grass or cattle in a feedlot, for beef producers, the concept of sustainability is probably not often on their mind. But part of the DNA for most beef producers is the desire to care for their land and work to do things better using fewer resources. That means much of what beef producers do every day fits right in with sustainability.
Sustainability to me is honoring and respecting the land, the animals, and the people in the beef community. It involves the people that raise the calves out on grass, farmers like us that bring those cattle in and are able to utilize crops like corn to continue feeding them to the end, the people that harvest those cattle and turning into steaks and hamburgers, and our consumers who are eating those and feeding their families this nutritious product.
Just as continuous effort to safeguard and improve food safety is required to keep consumers choosing beef, more and more sustainability at every level of the beef value chain is part of the buying decision consumers make.
It's important to be engaged in sustainability and the efforts. Retail is getting the clear message from their buyers and their customers, and it's filtering down through the production chain all the way to the ranch of what is sustainability, what's that messaging going to be. Consumers are interested in it, they're asking about it. We've got to provide that information. We've got a great story to tell. We have nothing to hide, and we need to get that out.
Working together, the total beef value chain has defined sustainability and set benchmarks to measure and share information about the environmental, social, and economic factors that make beef a sustainable product. I'm Brian Baxter reporting for NCBA's Cattlemen to Cattlemen.
And joining me now is Don Caldwell, a beef producer from Nebraska and a volunteer leader, currently serving as the chair of the Federation of State Beef Councils, and Chuck Coffey. He's a fifth-generation rancher from Oklahoma and vice chair of the Cattlemen's Beef Board. Chuck, why do producers like yourself need to care about sustainability?
When I think about sustainability, I kind of look at my family. We're fifth generation. My children are sixth, so I have 3 children in their 20s who are all actively involved in the ranch. And if we didn't concern ourselves with sustainability, it would be a business that would not perpetuate into the future. You know, there's kind of 3 components to sustainability. One's ecological, the other is economic, and then finally, the social aspect of sustainability, which we used to not pay a lot of attention to, but that's gotten to be very important. But we tend to try to work very hard to manage our lands, the soil, the grass, the cattle, the wildlife, the water, and so forth, so we leave our land better for the next generation or the next producer. We try to do so in a profitable way, so we are sustainable and we do stay in business. And we think we can do a better job as a producer, like most ranchers, than a state or government agency can do that's very political with how they handle things.
Right.
So.
you may know more about your ranch after 6 generations than they do.
Quite possibly.
And Don, you know, some people would suggest that this issue of sustainability is perfectly appropriate for large ranchers or big feedlots, but surely it doesn't apply to somebody who has 10 or 20 cows. What do you say to those folks?
Well, I say we're all in this together, every single one of us. And so if somebody has 10 or 20 cows, the person who's buying the meat from those 10 or 20 cows may very well care about what those folks do with the environment, with their cattle. And they certainly could, in fact, be doing it for a tax write-off, but they also need to be cognizant of what they're doing to the land for that next generation, just like Chuck mentioned. And we need to be more and more diligent when it comes to consumer perception of what we're doing. So 10 and 20 cows can be just as harmful or helpful to the environment as an extremely large feedlot can, or a larger ranch. Every one of us needs to be diligent in our efforts in the three-legged stool area that Chuck mentioned when he discussed your previous comments.
So Chuck, I'd ask you, certainly your goal as the Beef Checkoff is to build beef demand both domestically as well as globally. How does the topic and issue of sustainability fit in that goal?
We're very conscious about that because our public seems to more and more want to know where their food comes from, how the animals were treated, the welfare of the treatment of the animals, the safety of it. And so our goal, and the beef industry's goal, is to produce the most preferred, safest, most nutritious protein in the world, but to do so in a very responsible manner.
Yeah, consumers care about that, don't they?
They do, even globally. Especially, I was in Japan a few years ago, and they want to know where their food's coming from and how things are treated over there as well.
You know, Don, on this show we talk a lot about the state and national partnership, and I'm curious, how do state beef councils work together with the National Beef Checkoff to fund issues and initiatives around sustainability?
Good discussion point. So each state, as we've talked about, gets purview over 50 cents of the dollar that every producer remits. And those local or state beef council members can choose projects within their state, or they can send a portion to the Federation of State Beef Councils to do broader, more nationwide projects, tying that together with efforts happening through operating committee contracts as well. So tying it together with the national 50 cents or the Cattlemen's Beef Board. So projects that have taken place in recent years that I think are super cool is one, a regional breakdown of sustainability by segment of the country. And so sustainability, especially from an environmental perspective, does not look the same in my state of Nebraska compared to New York, Texas, California, and certainly not Idaho or New Mexico. Right. So we need to know how to do things right by area, and we need to be able to validate what producers are already doing and where they can be better. So that's one area of work that's happening. You're going to hear today from several different researchers that are doing really important work on our behalf, and some of that is also correlating data on consumer perception, perhaps, or other projects that are underway, whether it be economic or environmental. And each state can contribute directly to a project or through the Federation, as we discussed. Specific things that happen in several different states are what we call influencer events or influencer teaching tours. And so we'll bring a group of 20 or 30 people to an area or a state specifically, so Nebraska, because I'm from there and I love to bring people and show them what we do well. And we show them sustainability from producer perspective or from entire beef value chain perspective, more importantly. And it's really fun when they get it. So when you hear someone from Boston, for instance, sit at a kitchen table enjoying a piece of prime rib and the light bulb goes off and he says, now I understand. You guys really are sustainable because you're raising corn, you're good at raising corn, and the cattle are eating that corn, and the manure from the cattle is going back on the cornfield to fertilize it for the next year, and you're bringing the cows back to graze the stalks, the residue from the corn crop. He said that whole cycle does actually make sense. It's every day for us. We don't even think about telling that story, but to a buyer, from some aspect of the value chain, some major meat purchaser, that's very important that we get that word out so that they can go to battle on our behalf as well when it comes to consumer messaging.
It's a great example, and it leads me to my next question that I want to ask both of you, put you both on the spot a minute. Chuck, first to you, what are you doing in your own operation as it relates to sustainability?
Yeah, we think about that every day. Sustainability, conservation is another word I like to use, but we do things like water conservation, rotation grazing. We have numerous tours like Don mentioned, and we'll bring people out, everybody from the Natural Resource Conservation Service to universities to tour groups that come through, cattlemen's associations and so forth, to try to show them what we think we're doing right, and I also show them things that we've done wrong to try to overcome that and get ideas from them as well. But you know, getting the public to understand and know what it is we do and what impact agriculture has on rural America. And you know, when I think of sustainability, I think of sustainability of communities in small areas, rural school districts. You know, we provide a lot to the tax base through the cattle and operation that we run. The other thing I like to teach people and show them is that livestock in a grazing operation, we're cow-calf, livestock in a grazing operation are very compatible with the wildlife in the region. And it really takes both to optimize the wildlife that you have in that area and how you manage for wildlife.
Yeah. Don, how about you guys in Nebraska? What sorts of things are you doing in your operation to promote and improve sustainability?
So I could ditto a few of the things Chuck said. Wildlife is really important in our area. We have some pastures down in Kansas, and apparently the Kansas whitetail is a really big deal to many hunters. So we want to make sure that we keep that interaction between the livestock and wildlife and keep that opportunity, because that also is a revenue generator for our region. That brings me back to the 10 cow person that you talked about. Some of our neighbors are those people, and it's really important that they follow that same mindset. You know, they're contributing economically to the area in a big way, and so we need them to continue to be a good part of it. Something specific that we've done in just the last few years is pick up or purchase what was my great-grandmother's homestead. And it wasn't kept the best in the years prior to us having it. Cedar trees had overtaken much of that property. The fence hadn't been kept well. Water was done primarily from a creek that runs through one side of the property. So we did start a major overhaul of that, and some of it began with building clearing, you know, and pulling out old machinery, but much of it has been tree clearing, setting up a water line system. So we have 3 separate watering areas, putting in cross fence, and to validate it, something fun for ourselves, but to be able to show community members, like Chuck said, we flew the entire property with a drone prior to, during the project, and we'll do it again after. So it's fun to be able to incorporate modern technology to be able to show the story and the process of improving the grass, doing proper grazing, and doing nice things, you know, to increase the amount of wildlife in the area and get new species of plants coming up in the pasture as well that are not invasive species, by the way.
Right. What a great success story, and a neat deal with your family, given that heritage of that land, for sure. Thank you both for coming to the show and sharing some of your perspectives.
Thank you. It's fun to be here.
Sustainability research is funded by Beef Checkoff dollars. You can track the latest findings and get valuable information on sustainability and how it's impacting the beef cattle industry by visiting the website beefresearch.org. You can also find updates on sustainability and other important topics at the website mybeefcheckoff.com. You might be surprised to learn that the beef industry and agricultural producers are not being singled out in terms of consumer concern about the use of resources. Sustainability is actually an issue across nearly every industry, with companies of every kind launching programs of continuous improvement and working to demonstrate that they are economically, socially, and environmentally sustainable. Now, to speak a bit more about consumer interest in sustainability, we welcome Maddie Rubel of the Issues Management Team and Sean Darcy of the Market Research Team of the National Cattlemen's Beef Association, a contractor to the Beef Checkoff. Maddie, tell us, what are consumers saying as it relates to sustainability, particularly from a social media perspective?
So the conversation around sustainability and food in general is pretty broad. We see a lot of global impact, global consumption, environmental impact. When it comes to sustainability and beef specifically, we see concerns about food waste, as well as global consumption and those environmental impacts from that, like methane emissions from cattle.
And how has the conversation around sustainability either evolved or in some cases intensified?
Well, both actually have happened most recently over the last 2 years, notably. So I would like to say that the concern around sustainability for consumers is about the number 3 issue that we see in our tracking. So the number 1 issue that we monitor and keep an eye on is red meat and cancer. That's one that consistently pops up in our Google Analytics, website analytics, and issues monitors, followed by antibiotics, which is always a concern, and then sustainability.
Okay.
So that's not to say it's not an issue, because it is in those top 3 that we're constantly working against. But then in terms of how the conversation has shifted, it's increased over the last 2 years. I wouldn't say significantly, but notably, as well as the conversation has changed more to focus on environment and specifically the methane and greenhouse gas emissions from cattle.
Interesting. And Sean, you do a lot of research with Checkoff funded programs. What does the Checkoff funded research tell us consumers want to know specifically about sustainability?
Well, Kevin, it's a complicated question. I'm sure that you're aware of that when we talk about sustainability. It really runs the gamut. Consumers define that as what cattle are eating, the environment itself, how they're treated. So when we look at our tracking, it's not just one particular thing. It's really diversified in the variety of areas that they're looking at. But what we do see in our tracking is that a lot of consumers are finding all of these topics important, but a lot of them aren't believing the beef industry is meeting those standards yet. So we have this gap between the importance and what people believe are happening. So as a beef checkoff, it's important for us to identify those areas and start producing content that we can focus and make, communicate to our consumers what they're looking for.
Very good. And I'm curious, are you seeing differences between consumers in terms of old versus young, or people that have some rural background versus those who are urban or suburban? Are there differences in terms of their perceptions or what they want to learn more about?
It's interesting. We've just created and done a segmentation profiling analysis. And obviously there's different groups of consumers that care about different things. And we've identified one group for sure that we're calling the family food enthusiasts that really heightens this aspect of production, which sustainability falls in. And there's 1 or 2 other groups as well that have it on their radar. It may not be the driving force, but it's part of what is in their decision-making factor. And we do see that these consumers are skewing a little bit younger, a little bit more urban and suburban type of consumer than that rural consumer is.
That's interesting. And I'd ask you both one other question is, Maddie, first to you, why is it so important for us to invest Checkoff Resources in continuing to track and monitor what consumers think about this topic?
Well, from an issues management perspective, both proactively and reactively, it's absolutely vital that we invest in tracking these conversations so that proactively we can address concerns as they happen with third-party credentialed experts, even our internal experts here, reactively, so that we're entering, with the right message, the right conversation with the right person at the right time to make sure we're answering those concerns and really growing that consumer confidence in beef.
And Sean, what would you add?
Yeah, and from a research perspective, it's really important for us to keep our pulse on all issues as it relates to cattle, but specifically with sustainability, it's such a hot topic right now on social media. It helps us identify these, and we can work with our internal teams and heighten those pieces of content that are important and go out and investigate how consumers react to those specific pieces as it relates to sustainability to make sure it's answering those key questions.
Yeah, that's fantastic. We appreciate your insight, and there's no doubt that there's a strong linkage between what they think about how we raise cattle and treat the environment and their appetite for beef. Thanks for coming.
Thank you.
Still ahead on NCBA's Cattlemen to Cattlemen, we'll share the packer perspective on beef sustainability and more about what consumers want to know about how beef is raised. Stay with us. There's more to learn just ahead.
This special program is sponsored by the Beef Checkoff through the Cattlemen's Beef Board and the Federation of State Beef Councils.
The 2019 Cattle Industry Convention and NCBA Trade Show is set for the Big Easy, New Orleans, Louisiana. It's the cattle industry's biggest convention with education, networking, and fun. Plus, you can check out the huge NCBA Trade Show, outstanding entertainment, and much more. So let's go to New Orleans for the 2019 Cattle Industry Convention and NCBA Trade Show, January 30th through February 1st. Details at ncba.org.
At Case IH, we believe it's our job to provide you with solutions. That's why our Farmall and Maxim tractors, as well as our tools and attachments, are designed with you in mind. From mowing to baling to loading and more, we're here to help turn your to-dos into to-dones. At Case IH, we'll keep your days running smoothly with equipment that's durable, versatile, and highly efficient. No wonder farmers are more loyal to Case IH than any other brand. Visit your local dealer or go to caseih.com/livestock for more.
Welcome back. Today we're focusing on beef sustainability and what it means for the beef industry. Of course, the beef supply chain brings together a lot of players, from the farm or ranch gate to the consumer's plate. But beef sustainability begins with cow-calf producers and cattle feeders. So we ask a few of those beef producers to share their perspective on sustainability.
Yeah, sustainability is one of those buzzwords that's really hard as a cattle producer to wrap your head around, because there's so many different definitions of what sustainability is or what sustainability should be, and who gets to define that. So if you look at our operation specifically, for us to be sustainable means that we have to be able to produce the feed that we need for our animals, and then utilize that manure to put it back onto the fields to grow the crop for next year to raise feed for our animals. But at the end of the day, making money while doing it so we can play again next year. So for us, that means we're sustainable. We can take care of ourselves, we can pay our bills, we can support our family.
Sustainability is something we all talk about. It means a lot of different things to a lot of different people, but we know that our end consumers are concerned about all the aspects of sustainability, whether it's economic, whether it's what we do for community, as well as what we do for the environment. And we think it's very important that beef producers are the ones that set the guidelines for what sustainability means to us.
So what I want farmers and ranchers to know is to not be afraid of the word sustainability. That is just a term, and I think we worry that it's a consumer term. But frankly, we have been working on sustainability our entire past. We've been working about transitioning the ranch. We've been working about conservation. We've been working on all sorts of things that would be considered sustainability today. So it's just a term. And in my opinion, we need to own back that term. It's not a consumer term. It matters to us too.
So that's a bit about what producers are saying when it comes to sustainability. And joining me now with another perspective is Dr. Kim Stackhouse Lawson, Director of Sustainability at JBS and Chair of the United States Roundtable for Sustainable Beef. Kim, tell us, what are some of the big picture trends from a supply chain standpoint that are driving this discussion around sustainability?
Yeah, so the consumer today is really driving the discussions around sustainability, asking for increased transparency from the entire supply chain. And while consumers won't necessarily define sustainability as we define it within the industry as it relates to environmentally sound, socially responsible, and economically viable beef, what does resonate with consumers are proof points that point back to those individual efforts related to sustainability. So for example, if we can demonstrate that the beef value chain has improved their environmental performance through improved water quality on the ranch, or improved animal welfare at the packing plant, or having a ranch passed down to the next generation because it was profitable, that does resonate with today's consumer. And I think that if we can continue to find these proof points and really communicate them in an authentic and transparent and real way to the consumer, we can and will drive increased confidence in beef.
That's good news. And so how does the Beef Checkoff funded research being done in this area help processors like you and the channel either make decisions or communicate this message to consumers?
Sure. So Kevin, the Beef Checkoff is absolutely the leading authority in sustainability research, and not just as it relates to beef, but for all of agriculture. And it today is really shaping the way that we can talk about food sustainability with the consumer. So I think it's important to
to look at the consumer just a little bit, because the consumer has changed drastically in just the last 5 years. So the modern consumer today has more access to information and is more connected than they've ever been before through social media channels. Now, what we see is that consumers have less trust of big brands and big companies and big institutions, and they do more of their individual research. And usually that research is not a deep dive into complex issues, right? Normally it's you're scrolling through Facebook, you see a meme, you look for the 20-second video, and that's really what's informing their perceptions and their decisions. So where we have a unique opportunity is to take these incredible messages and stories and work that producers are doing from across the country and translate them into meaningful, authentic, real messages that consumers can gravitate to. And I think what we need to remind ourselves is that the millennial consumer, while they aren't doing deep dives, they are really connected to what's real, and they care about something that's based in science. And so if we can be that credible source to them, we can have tremendous influence over their purchasing decisions.
So Kim, I'm curious, what are the biggest questions you get from your customers?
So the number one question we're receiving today is around the responsible use of antibiotics. And I think both of us can understand the complexities of that topic, sort of balancing human health and animal welfare. But today, our retail partners are getting more and more pressure from consumers and stakeholders around this issue.
And you are currently chair of the U.S. Roundtable for Sustainable Beef. I'm curious, tell us about the voices that sit around that table and make decisions.
Sure. So the U.S. Roundtable for Sustainable Beef is a multi-stakeholder initiative working to advance, support, and communicate the continuous improvement and sustainability of U.S. beef production. So the organization is made up of 111 members at this point. It's grown substantially across the entire beef value chain. So cow-calf producers, auction markets, feed yards, packers, processors, retail and food service partners, allied industry, and civil society. And that group, I guess what's really exciting about that group is that it's really the first multi-stakeholder initiative working to solve some of the toughest beef industry challenges proactively, really by identifying solutions. And so through trust, respect, and a lot of hard work, the Roundtable has developed a toolkit, which is going out for its second round of public comment in December, to really work to help the industry lead and really build consumer trust. And so I think, you know, that's not a Checkoff funded initiative, but we should really, as the beef value chain, view the U.S. Roundtable for Sustainable Beef and the Checkoff work as really, you know, moving this industry hand in hand to continue to advance, but more importantly, really connect with the end user and to develop increased consumer confidence in beef.
And that will only become more important as the years go by. Thanks for joining us and giving us your perspective.
You bet. Thanks for having me.
Still to come on Cattlemen and Cattlemen, we'll talk about the valuable environmental benefits that producers provide when cattle are on the land. Don't go away. We'll have more right after this.
When the field is your office, you never get tired of going to work. Cut, rake, bale, repeat. New Holland offers the power and versatility to get through the day. From small squares to large squares and everything in between, New Holland has you covered. Visit your local dealer today to find out more. New Holland, equipped for a new world.
One of the strengths of the beef industry is its diversity. Beef cattle are raised in nearly every state and widely varied geographic conditions. We asked several beef producers in different regions to share their thoughts on the sustainability of their own unique beef cattle operations.
This ranch is 25 miles from the Orlando International Airport, so we are basically in the middle of civilization. So our operation is being stressed by urban development, but sustainability is what makes this ranch operate efficiently in my book. We've got a grass operation. The calves are raised on grass. When we work them, everything is toward the consumer's end. We don't want to give them a product that they're not going to like, because we want to be proud of our product, and we are.
Sustainability to me is a very large, complex issue in agriculture. The simplest way I can explain it is, on this farm, whether it's grazing or row crop, we are trying to increase our organic matter in our soils. In our operation, the cattle are our main tool for rebuilding soil health, to rebuild soil organic matter. The cows can transform a cover crop into usable nutrients for the next crop faster than any other way to rebuild soil.
Here in the southeast area of Arizona, it's predominantly cow-calf production. As you see the landscape behind me, you're not going to farm this. You know, it's just the terrain is too rough, the precipitation is not consistent enough, and the cost and feasibility of putting in irrigation in a landscape like this isn't feasible. So that cow-calf production has proven to be successful, and if we do that in a sustainable and responsible manner, that's a great way to use the landscape here.
Here now to talk more about the regional diversity of the beef industry and how that connects to sustainability are Dr. Al Rotz with the USDA Agricultural Research Service and Dr. Sarah Place, the Senior Director of Sustainable Beef Research for NCBA, a contractor to the Beef Checkoff. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Sure.
Dr. Rotz, why don't you begin by telling us how the differences in region impacts not only production practices, but the environmental impact of beef cattle?
Sure. Yeah, it turns out that there really is quite a bit of difference, quite a bit of variation as you move across the country. And it's not to say that, say, one region is better positioned than another. I mean, there's trade-offs. And when it comes to environmental impacts, there's a lot of different environmental impacts that we can look at, from air emissions to water quality and different resource uses and that kind of thing. But I guess, you know, when you look at across the United States, of course, the more humid climate in the east really affects our production practices in the east. Mm-hmm. We tend to have, well, more rainfall means more runoff of nutrients, more leaching of nutrients, some things like that. We move to the west, more arid conditions, more extensive production systems. There we tend to have more gaseous emissions. Not, you know, water quality is really not much of an issue when it comes to the west. But so there's those kind of trade-offs as we look from region to region.
And Sarah, why don't you tell us a little bit about the history of the life cycle research that NCBA pioneered several years back and why it's so important to our industry?
Yeah, absolutely. So the Beef Checkoff has invested in sustainability research for the past, actually since 2011, and where we started doing life cycle assessment research. And Dr. Rotz was first involved in some of that early research. And so life cycle assessment is essentially an environmental accounting system where we look at the whole supply chain of beef and we understand where those impacts are, some of those things that Al just mentioned, Dr. Rotz just mentioned. So that's really kind of the genesis of that, and it's about measuring where we are and benchmarking where we are so we can communicate that to our fellow producers, but also to the consumers who are actually purchasing our products.
Fantastic. And Dr. Rotz, again, the question I would ask would be, as you think about the regional differences that you were mentioning, how does that impact each producer's ability to adapt their operation and be sustainable in their own way?
Yeah, well, each producer is unique. One thing we can say for sure is that there's no magic solution for everybody across the country. Everybody's kind of unique, and you have to look at your situation and what's going to work there. So in the east, you know, we said wetter climate, more focus on water quality perhaps and that kind of thing. So maybe that's where you'd want to look at what you could do to reduce runoff, use your nutrients more effectively. Tends to be a lot more fertilizer use and that sort of thing in the east. And you know, I guess we just really want to use it effectively, you know, through more precision application and that sort of thing to make sure that we're using it wisely and not pouring a lot of it into the environment.
Right. And constantly improving. And I guess that'd be my question to you, Dr. Place, is that I hear a lot in the industry, the real focus is about continual improvement. So how can we use the information that folks like you all are providing as beef producers to improve our sustainability from an environmental, an economic, and a social standpoint?
Yeah, and that's really key what you just highlighted, that it's not just about the environment. This conversation usually just focuses on sometimes things that we get a bit of a black eye with in the industry, but being economically viable is number one for a sustainable operation. So in terms of how we use this work, you know, that's part of our continuing work with Dr. Rotz, is looking at more specifically, how can we improve some of these outcomes that we found in an economically viable manner as well, using kind of a case study approach. But the bigger picture is, you know, this is both important for producers and understanding how they can get better, but also communicating that success and that long-term stewardship back to our consumers who really want to know and understand that information.
It certainly is a hot topic, and one that I think we can all improve on.
Absolutely.
Thanks for coming today.
Sure. Thank you.
Once again, you can learn more about beef sustainability and Beef Checkoff funded research at the website beefresearch.org. And you can also find information on sustainability and other ways your checkoff dollars are being invested at the website mybeefcheckoff.com. Of course, the reason we as cattlemen and women raise our animals is to produce beef from the land. And what some outside of agriculture fail to recognize is the way sunlight and soil, managed correctly, will turn into grass for grazing and ultimately high-quality beef protein for consumers around the world. Joining us now to highlight the importance of this sustainable cycle are Dr. Tryon Wickersham of Texas A&M and Emily Andrini of the University of California, Davis. Thank you both for joining us today.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us.
Dr. Wickersham, let's start with you. I hear a lot the term of upcycling. What does that term mean, especially those of us in beef cattle production?
Okay, the term upcycling is something consumers will be really familiar with from watching HGTV, converting pallets into end tables, coffee tables, those kind of things. And it's kind of an idea to help consumers understand a fairly complicated process in ruminant animals, and that's taking low quality proteins and converting them into a high quality protein such as beef.
Okay, so as we talk about those various feedstuffs, let's visit Emily about how those feedstuffs we use in beef cattle production affect upcycling.
Right, so we can feed cattle many different byproduct feeds, and they consume a lot of feeds that are not human edible. One example that I like from an article by Dr. Sarah Place is that about 2 million stocker cattle each year graze winter wheat pasture. And that wheat is later harvested for flour that people consume, and a byproduct of that wheat milling process is wheat middlings, which we then feed back to cattle. So that's one example of how they kind of integrate into that cycle of grazing crops that can also be used for human consumption, but they're consuming the inedible parts of those crops.
And Dr. Wickersham, I'd like to ask you a question about animal feed versus human food and the competition that exists between the two. My daughter came home from school a couple years ago with an article that she was asked to read for health class that was basically making the case against animal industry and animal agriculture, because it suggested that given all the grain that we feed to livestock, that grain could be better utilized to feed starving people around the world. And instead, we are making the world more food insecure by feeding feed grains to livestock. What would you say to that, and how does that relate to upcycling?
So this research is really trying to answer that question and trying to determine the societal benefit of beef cattle production in general. And so when you look at what cattle consume for most of their diet, or most of their lives and their diet, humans are unable to consume that. And by feeding that to cattle, they're adding a lot of value to that, creating a product we like to eat and is highly nutritious, and that being beef. And then for a small time in their life, they spend that in the feedlot where they do consume grain. But even when we look at that grain they consume, if we fed that grain to children, we can feed roughly 2 times to 3 times as many children if we went ahead and fed that grain to beef and took advantage of the upcycling of the protein.
So Emily, this is such an important topic in lots of circles, and how does the research that you all have access to help us to maybe have different conversations or talk a little bit differently about sustainability and how beef cattle production fits into that sustainability message?
Right, so I think that our research will hopefully broaden the discussion for beef's place in the diet. We can hopefully highlight the improved protein quality that you get by consuming beef compared to plant-based foods. Beef has a protein quality that's over 2 times greater than that of corn. And I think that highlighting that aspect of beef, the micronutrients it provides that you can't get from other plant-based foods, as well as the upcycling aspect of raising beef cattle is very important.
Fantastic. Thank you all for coming and sharing some of that insight with us. I really appreciate your information today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Still to come on Cattlemen to Cattlemen, do beef producers get enough credit for the way they care for their land and natural resources? We'll look at this issue and more when we return. Welcome back as we continue our discussion about beef sustainability and its importance to the beef industry. Here now is Dr. Tex Taylor of the University of Wyoming. Thanks for joining us today, Dr. Taylor.
It's a pleasure to be here, Kevin.
You bet. So, you know, I've heard the term ecosystem services as it relates to beef cattle, and what do we mean by that term?
Well, ecosystem services are basically goods and services that are provided to people but through natural processes like found in nature. They're usually divided into 4 categories: food and water production, control of climate and diseases, looking at nutrient cycles and crop pollination, and then finally stuff like recreation and spiritual benefits, sorts of stuff. Beef industry, of course, provides food, which is an ecosystem service, but it also provides another number of other ecosystem services.
Absolutely. So what are some of the things that producers are doing in terms of grassland management that they're not getting paid for right now?
Okay, there are a number of things, including ecosystem services, such as wildlife habitat, open spaces, the preservation of open spaces, recreational opportunities, cultural heritage, biodiversity, and plant health, you know, to name a few.
You bet. And so as you work with ranchers, do you have any suggestions about strategies that they can employ to try to get monetize, or to try to monetize some of these services that they're providing?
There's some potential things that could be done, and in some cases are being done. Of course, in terms of easements, you know, conservation easements and other sorts of easements where the rancher gets paid for maintaining the ecosystem functions going on. Recreational enterprises, take advantage of those resources, maybe as simple as a trespassing fee, maybe going as far as actual outfitting. Mm-hmm. We have producers in Wyoming who are looking at trying to provide mitigation for energy development. In terms of if you develop an oil well or something, you have to mitigate some of that, and they may be able to provide the resources to do that. I suppose the other thing that comes to mind is just participating in conservation programs that are cost share. We're looking at practices that benefit both cattle production and also wildlife.
You know, some people claim that beef has a high cost to society in terms of the greenhouse gases that beef cattle produce that aren't really reflected in the value of beef as a protein. What do you say to those people with those arguments?
Well, admittedly, cattle do emit greenhouse gases. It's not a large amount. I think the EPA estimates that all agriculture emits about 10% of the greenhouse gases, and livestock digestion is about 1/3 of that. So beef cattle would be part of that. Mm-hmm. There's been some work in Canada that would suggest that they rate greenhouse gas emissions from cattle as a moderate impact. They also say that it's somewhat offset by the potential of CO2 capture in grasslands. That same study also found that there were 8 other ecosystem services where beef cattle contributed positively to. So if you take a look at the whole picture, cattle ranching and beef cattle are probably one of the more sustainable land use activities we have.
Interesting, and therefore the reason to look at this as an entire life cycle, not just individual elements, I suspect, right?
Yes, that's the whole point, is if you take a look at the broader picture,
yeah,
rather than focusing on just one aspect.
Element. Good. Thank you so much for coming today, Dr. Taylor. We appreciate that.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Once again, you can learn more about beef sustainability and Beef Checkoff funded research at the website beefresearch.org. And you can also find information on sustainability and other ways your Checkoff dollars are being invested at the website mybeefcheckoff.com. There's a lot to learn and think about when it comes to the issue of beef sustainability. We'll have more coming up next.
Say goodbye to your toughest pasture and rangeland weeds for good. Because one product offers season-long control, handles the widest spectrum of broadleaf weeds, and clears the way for increased forage with greater grazing flexibility. So you get more beef per acre at a cost that can't be beat. It's Grazon Next HL herbicide, and if it's in your pastures, plain and simple, weeds won't be.
Hey folks, I'm Bobby Hebert of Cajun Cannon from the New Orleans Saints. Come on down to the Big Easy for the 2019 Cattle Industry Convention and NCBA Trade Show. It'll be the biggest and the best you've ever seen. There'll be great food, fun, and outstanding music from country music duo Big and Rich. So join me and let's go to New Orleans January the 30th to February the 1st. Find out more at beefusa.org.
Welcome back to Cattlemen, where today we're highlighting the issue of sustainability and what it means for beef producers. Joining me now to wrap things up for us is Dr. Sarah Place. She's the Senior Director of Beef Sustainability Research for NCBA, a contractor to the Beef Checkoff. You know, at the beginning of our conversation, we talked about the why sustainability is so important to all of us as beef producers. And I mean, this is an issue that really is not going to go away, is it?
No, definitely not. So it's kind of part of this trend of consumers being more interested in how and where their food was raised. And so sustainability is a part of that. And they want to know that when they go to the meat case and make that purchase to feed their families, that the practices that got that product actually to their plates have been sustainable, have been humane, etc. So from that standpoint, I don't think this issue is going to go away, and that's why we're investing dollars in this and showing the excellent job that producers are currently doing and showing what we're going to do further to improve.
And speaking of investing dollars, let's talk about the how a little bit. How beef producers, through the Beef Checkoff, as you indicated, are working to improve what we do and how we do it. Can you share with us a few of the primary areas of focus?
Yeah, so we have, related to research, we're doing research on life cycle assessment and actually benchmarking where we are, right? Okay. It's kind of the old adage, you can't manage what you don't measure.
Right.
And so that's really key. But we're also looking at a lot of these other areas where we're talking about the social positives, if you will, of beef. So what we add to the food supply in terms of protein and essential nutrients, to the management services that our producers provide all over the United States from a standpoint of all the grazing lands that our producers steward and have stewarded for decades, for generations, right? So really it's about highlighting some of those things that people have become a little bit disconnected from as they've moved away from the farm and their own families, and just kind of highlighting that sustainability has been a key aspect of beef production always.
All along, right?
Yeah.
And when you say the word sustainability, I've found that it's almost a lightning rod. You get an emotional reaction from all sorts of different people. So many aspects, so many details and angles of sustainability. What do you want producers to know most about this?
Yeah, kind of coming off of what I just said, I want producers to realize, what you have been doing in your ethos of, how am I going to stay profitable, be a good community member, take care of my animals, be a good steward of the land, the things that you're dedicated to right now, that is sustainability. So I would hope producers realize, whether you have 10 cows or 1,000, right, that you have been focusing on sustainability, even if you haven't called it that word. So I think it's important for our producers to be proud of that and recognize that If anybody's going to claim that word, it should be beef producers because they have been focused on this for so long.
Yeah, I've often said there are so many of these multi-generational operations that if they weren't implementing sustainable practices as it relates to range management, water management, and even livestock management, they wouldn't be able to do this for 3 and 4 generations like so many of our members do. So thank you so much for the important role you're playing on this critically important issue.
Thank you.
Once again, if you want to learn more about the research around beef sustainability and get insights on ideas you can use in your own operation, then visit the Beef Checkoff funded website, beefresearch.org. We'll be right back.
If Baxter makes you laugh, you're at the right place. He has an offer. Of course, this is a commercial. 6-hour-long DVDs filled with live shows, Emmy-winning comedy, all Baxter at his best. And the price is right, $25 plus shipping. 800-654-2550 or online at baxterblack.com. You want to know what he's like in real life? Well, kind of like you.
We know you're up before the dawn because the cattle rise before the sun. And you spend long hours in the saddle because the herd isn't always over the next rise. And you care for the land because you know it takes care of your family. And we know you do great work. And it's time to tell that story to the marketplace. IMI Global is here to help you do just that.
Each year, the Cattlemen's Beef Board and the National Cattlemen's Beef Association joins other industry organizations at the annual Cattle Industry Convention. This is the place where issues like beef sustainability are discussed and where valuable information is shared with producers from all across our country. The 2019 Cattle Industry Convention and NCBA Trade Show is coming up in New Orleans. Convention registration is open and you can sign up online today. The 2019 convention runs from January 30th through February 1st. Go to ncba.org for all the details on how to register for this valuable event. Well, that wraps up this special edition of NCBA's Cattlemen to Cattlemen. Thanks so much for spending time with us and learning a bit more about beef sustainability. We'll see you again next week right here on RFD TV.